the last 2 weeks, Kath, we've been talking all about this book that we've been really enjoying reading, Where the Light Gets In by Ben Crow. And we've been talking all about expectations. And I remember, back a couple of weeks ago when I sort of said to you, okay, well, if we're living under kind of the weight of others' expectations, how do we just get rid of it? And we had a chuckle about it. And, we've sort of shared some things in the last few weeks, but Ben Crow kind of finishes this chapter, this conversation of expectations with some tools. And I just think today would be really great to share couple of his thoughts and see where that sits with us, see if we kind of, if we think that helps us to hop out from the weight of expectations, and we'll go from there. How about that?
It sounds absolutely great. And yeah, so we shared that, a first place, which is always a good place in topics like this, is the awareness piece. And, to
Yes.
even just recognize that this is what we're doing. And
Mm.
that's a start. But, once you've recognized and we kind of see, oh, hang on a minute, I think I've got a bit of extra pressure on myself because I'm putting expectations on myself or fallen into this trap again,
Yeah.
what next? What
What is
can we do?
next?
And we also know that the more we focus on or tell ourselves what we don't want, and the more we focus on what we don't want, it's like that just grows bigger and we just do more of what we don't want.
It's the magnet to see it more and keep
So
going
it's
there.
really,
Yeah.
really helpful to
Yeah.
switch gears and go, okay, so what do we want instead? And what are the
Mm.
replacements?
Yeah.
It's far easier to replace things than to just stop things. Yeah,
Yes, it is. And we've
yeah.
talked about that a number of times. I know I've talked about replacing chocolate with the apple. No, don't do that. It doesn't work.
So,
Anyway, so yeah, what does he say?
yeah.
He talks about the first place to start is to replace expectation with appreciation.
And I love this. And another word for appreciation is gratitude. And
Mm,
so let's talk about that. So what
okay.
could that look like? So he shares that when we shift from expectation to appreciation,
Mm,
it just really helps us to shift perspective.
mm,
Yeah.
mm.
So can you give us an example, Al?
Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about, goals and expectations, one that often, because it was such a big goal in my life, was the ultra marathon. And I guess if I was to think about that in this light, looking through it with this lens of appreciation, the training, the journey of achieving the goal really could have been, and in fact it was, I just didn't have this language at the time because I hadn't read the book. I was able to appreciate the strength of my body, getting healthier, becoming fitter, enjoying being in nature, being thankful for the time that I could be outdoors training. The actual journey itself to getting to the start mark, and I think I remember sharing that on the original
Yes, you did.
podcast, was
Yeah.
for me was getting to the start line. And even if I couldn't, let's just think for a moment, if I'd been sick or any of those things, I could still have appreciated the journey
Yeah.
because I was had a different mindset. The strength that I had physically and mentally was a whole new ballgame for me. I was a completely different person, really. Um, so I really learnt to appreciate that journey, the training. But had I not, I could have easily sat in expectation.
Yeah. And then I think, and that's a lovely share because I think when you can draw on recognizing what there is to appreciate in the process, it
Mm,
almost helps to keep you in the process.
yeah.
You're more likely to continue and to actually get to the start line.
Mm,
Like if it's all about expectation and pressure to get to the start line, it would be quite easy to just at some point in the journey go, oh, this is just too hard
too
and
hard.
I'm just being ridiculous and
I don't
I'm
have
like,
it.
what was I even thinking? And bailing out on it.
Yeah.
But by focusing on, as you shared, appreciating that your body was able to do all these things,
Mm,
that's a totally different
mm,
perspective and a
mm,
shift in thinking and a whole new mindset which
Yeah.
is way more likely to keep you in the game.
Well, and it did.
Well, good on you, without even having this language, that is how you chose to view the journey. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well, there's so much in nature. I mean, you and I have shared that all the time when
Mm.
we're outdoors. Like how much does it stir our spirit? It just and speak life to our heart and our eyes, just what we see. And so when we can pause for a moment and appreciate that and be grateful for it, um, it does. It automatically shifts our perspective, whether or not we're heading towards a goal or not. Just having a heart of gratitude, a heart of appreciation, just gives us a whole new shift.
And I remember, I mean, I know I go back, I think last week I went, mentioned Graham Cook, but I also remember him sharing at one point that Um, I actually need to go and look this up because I haven't looked this up yet. So just full disclosure, I haven't actually gone and looked this up, but he did share that when we are focusing on what we're grateful for and gratitude,
Hmm.
it fires up an area in our brain. Like if you go into an MRI, functional
Okay,
MRI,
yeah.
and you're thinking about all that you're grateful for and can appreciate, the
It
area
lights
that
up.
fires up is but it's very close to the area that lights up when you're in fear. And apparently our brain can't do both at the same time. So
Agreed.
it's really hard to be fearful about something and to do gratitude at the same time. Like
Yeah,
yeah. So it's I love this because if you're focusing on what you are grateful for and and are appreciative about, it feels different in your body.
it
It does
does.
put you more into a calm state.
Mm,
Ben Crow talks a lot about a playful state, which is actually brings us to the second point. But
mm,
yeah, I mean and there's so much literature out there on Dr. Seligman and positive psychology talks about journaling about gratitude and what three things went well this morning or what three things went
yeah,
well today. And so there's a lot out there that backs the
mm,
benefit of
that's right.
practicing gratitude. And again, when we were talking about the regrets last week, the top five regrets people have on their deathbed, and the one was, I wish I had chosen to be happier. You could also probably say, oh, I wish I had chosen to appreciate things more. So
Yeah,
again, recognizing it's a choice point.
it is
We
a
all get to
choice point.
choose to be
Mm,
appreciative, and
mm,
such a helpful thing to remember and be reminded of.
yeah. And I think what I'm just considering now is the 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 state of being in expectation rather than appreciation. It's kind of like being in a state of stressful, being
Mm,
highly
mm,
strung and in a stressful state versus having being in a state where our nervous system is calm and relaxed. And we all know that there's a time where we're going to have stressful moments. But imagine if we lived our whole life, or there's probably been seasons where we can remember we've been in a constant state of stress, and it causes us to just not be able to think clearly and all of those things.
mm,
But the
mm.
moment we can start to help our nervous system to reset, which can be done through the art of gratitude and appreciation, it calms us. We're able to see so much more clearly. And so, yeah, there's a lot of science around it. And what were you going to say? The second one, the second way to replace expectation is through experimentation.
Yeah, and I was just alluding to, if we're not in the fear state,
We're in
how
a
Ben Crow off, all the way through his book talks about being in a more playful state and
mm,
how do we bring more play, and I've often said to you on the podcast, oh, I feel like I'm just like way too serious about life. And I do have friends in my world, and I observe in them a more playful way of being. And it's always
mm,
something that's been attractive to me. And I've often thought, oh,
mm.
I just would love to be more playful. And you know what? It's possible.
It is possible.
I could sit here and just go, that's just my personality. It's just how I'm wired. It's just who I am. But no, I can choose.
Mm.
And one of the ways to choose to be more playful is to replace expectation with experimentation.
Experimentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remember a question talking again about the ultra marathon because I'm constantly thinking, what's an example of this in my life? And
Yes.
people were asking me, how am I going to do this? What food am I going to eat? What sort of exercises do I need to know? At the moment people ask me that, it's fear because I don't know. I didn't know all the answers, but what helped me was to realize it's okay to not know and to just give something a go. And the word is to experiment. And
Yeah. Test things
experimenting
out.
was a
Yeah.
lot more of a relaxed, calm, playful approach to feeling the need to know what I had to do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I would have just sat in fear and I wouldn't have even gone. I wouldn't have even attempted the goal.
And the other thing I like about this, the notion of experimenting, we were taught way, way back in the beginning of our coaching that if you've tried something and it,
In
fails,
work.
then
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not failure, it's feedback. And I think
Mm.
when you're experimenting with things, you
Mm.
testing things out and then noticing, is this
What
working or
works?
is this not working? And so you're way more curious about the
Mm.
feedback you're getting. Whereas
Mm.
I know growing up, I grew up in a very performance-driven environment, and it was about the achievement. It was about the end, the goal and the
Yeah.
outcome, and it was about getting the A, on your report card, and it was less
Mm.
about the journey along the
Yeah.
way, and so this notion of experimenting and looking for the feedback and asking, oh, did this work or didn't that work? I remember when that concept was sort of taught to us again in the coaching, I realized it was a skill set I was lacking in because
Yeah.
I didn't give much regard to going back and reflecting. And even in our coaching, you and I, that we are taught in our mentoring sessions to reflect and, ask yourself what went well, what would you like to improve
Mhm.
on, what is working, what could I do differently, all
Yeah.
those kinds of questions. That's a skill set we can all practice.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, if you're listening to this and you're feeling like it's an area that you kind of
Mm.
have ignored, like I had, just to encourage you that it's actually quite fun to
Mm.
sit, and then whatever that looks like for you. I know for some people it's journaling. For some people, I do a lot of reflecting on my walking and in the shower and in the car. And I'm not the greatest journaler, that's another skill
Yeah.
set I can choose to grow in for sure. But the notion of experimenting is also, I think it comes along with that, being curious about the feedback
Yeah. And,
and
and it
reflections. Yeah.
it helps you to feel a little bit more free, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's freedom in the word. If we're experimenting, we're giving it a crack.
It's playful.
It's
It's far more playful. Yeah. Yeah.
gives freedom and yeah, it's nowhere near as scary.
Yeah. I must just confess and put this out there though, that when I am cooking or baking,
Okay. Is there no
um,
experimenting?
I'm not the greatest for the experimenting. My husband can just throw a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's just
Mm.
magical where I follow the recipe to the T. And I
Fair
remember as a
enough.
little kid once with my cousin, oh, she had such a laugh. We were in the kitchen making chocolate brownies, and she was reading the recipe to me, and she could see. I mean, even way back then, I was like, but Jules, we've got to follow the recipe. And so, in her like joking and playful way, she said to me, oh, and we need 150 chocolate chips, need to go in. And without even
150.
thinking, I tipped the packet over and I started counting, and she just dissolved on the floor. She's like, Kath, I'm only joking, just a handful. And I was, wanting to put exactly 150.
150. Oh, wow. See, if
So,
I saw that, I'd be like, oh, what's a few more mean? Just tip a few more.
so yes,
Yeah.
for some people it comes easier than others, but I love the playfulness in that
Yeah.
word experimenting. So yeah,
Yeah.
giving
Agreed.
yourself permission to experiment.
Yeah. And then the final way is to replace expectation with dedication. And I thought this was a little bit interesting. Dedication.
Yeah, I've got a fabulous story for this one. So
Okay.
when I was still practicing medicine, the area that I enjoyed most was chronic health. I liked the continuous care and building relationship with clients and being with them on the journey. And
Yeah,
so the specific area I was in was diabetes and endocrine treatment. So helping
sure.
people to manage their journeys with chronic disease. And as you would know, probably, well, it's kind of is general knowledge, I think, that anyone with diabetes has a challenge when it comes to food and diet, and
Mm.
you can't just eat whatever you want, especially
Yeah.
if you're injecting insulin and all those things. And so often part of the journeying with patients was having those conversations around lifestyle change and food and exercise and all those things. And so often you'd start that conversation and it was like a screen would go up, and
Yeah.
the patient's eyes would glaze over and they're like, I don't want to hear what you're telling me. Like, I just don't
Yeah.
want. And I must confess that back then I had no idea of coaching, and I wish, my regret is I wish I could have been more coach-like, but I was in,
Mm.
GP mode, and you just prescribe, and there are
Yeah.
these guidelines and you have to do this and you must do that and you should do this and that, and obviously it was hard for people to hear. But
Mm.
however, the patients that took this on board and seemed to kind of just do it so more easily. I'm sorry, that's terrible
Mm.
English, but much more easily were the pregnant patients. So the moment I had a
Mm.
pregnant mum where it was their health was no longer about them, but it was about the
Yeah.
baby. And
Yeah,
the mum was
right.
like, I'm going to follow this because I want the best for somebody else, for this little baby in me.
Yes.
Oh, sugar levels just dropped and stabilized, and suddenly, they were like your ideal patient. And I
Yeah.
think it's the whole thing of dedication, when
Yeah,
you're
right.
doing something for something more than you, and for
Yeah,
something more
wow.
than you that really matters, that
Yeah.
really you want to care for, so I don't know, that makes the dedication part
Mm.
makes a whole lot of sense.
Interesting. And I guess
Mm.
that's why, when people do these big challenges, physical challenges, and it's for a greater cause, raising
Yeah.
money or an awareness for, whether it's mental health or cancer or any of those things, people can go out and do pretty out of their comfort zone challenges because they're doing it for something greater. They're dedicating it to something other than themselves.
Yeah. And so recently my hubby did the Tour de Cure. So it's a cycling
Mm.
event, and the
Okay.
signature tour goes over, I think it's 11 days. And
Okay.
then there are smaller events all the way around Australia. And so he did
Right.
our local South Australia event. It was a 3-day
Oh,
event,
good on him.
which, yeah, he trained for, but the focus, it was to raise money for cancer treatments and
Hmm.
research. And each rider was given a sticker to stick on the middle bar of their bicycle and to list the specific people they know that
Right.
have been impacted. And let's face it, everybody knows somebody. And
100%.
Greg initially was like, oh, who do I know? And then so he called me because it was the dinner before, and the evening before. So he called me and said, I just want, to work this through with me. Who do we know? And it didn't take long before we had
Mm,
too many
a
names for
list.
that little
Yeah.
sticker on his bike, and people dear to our hearts. And he said it was so helpful. Every time there was like a long climb or a really
Yeah.
heavy bit in the journey, you could just look down and see those
The
names and know that
names.
that's the reason, you're
Yeah.
dedicating. And some of the names he had there were, dear friends that had already passed, or family members, and some were friends and family members that are survivors because
Mm,
of, funds raised through events like that. So it was so
mm,
powerful.
mm,
Um, Rather than the expectation, oh, I better finish because I've raised all this money and people are expecting me to, to
mm.
finish,
Yeah.
focusing on who you're dedicating it for.
That's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Yeah.
What great examples. Because when I read that, I was kind of like, oh, yeah, I can see how that would help, but I don't think it shifted and sort of sat and resonated all that well with me. So thank you for sharing those examples. That helps me to see. Mm.
Yeah, and I think it's a helpful one to remember when you're on a journey towards a goal and you feel like you're losing momentum and you feel like you're losing motivation.
Mm.
Even that question. So if I
Yeah.
was dedicating this journey to somebody, who would
Yeah.
that be? Or if, to a cause or whatever. Um,
Mm.
it's a really helpful question to sit with if you're on a journey towards a goal and you haven't thought of,
Yeah.
that part of things.
Mm,
So yeah.
mm.
So there we have
Oh,
many different ways
yeah.
to shift perspective away from living by expectations and
Mm,
being more playful, taking
mm.
the pressure off yourself. Um,
Yeah. Being in a state of gratitude. Yeah,
yeah,
beautiful. But it all
yeah,
started, like we said a few weeks back, with just even an awareness,
yeah,
becoming aware that that's potentially what we're doing. That's how we're living our life. And if we want to make some changes. We might not. We might be quite okay, but we might want to. And I think the book is sort of giving us some ideas of where we can shift and what we can do. And I've loved today's conversation. So what was it? Appreciation. Shift it to appreciation, experimentation, and dedication.
yeah.
Beautiful.
So helpful, so helpful. So if you
Mm.
haven't yet been inspired to get this book, we recommend Where the Light Gets In and
Yeah,
great read. And yeah, gosh, we've only just hit on chapter one. So,
far
so
out.
much in here. I know it's one of the books that I'm just read a page, circle, underline, have a think, put it down, journal.
Mm.
I actually am starting to journal again, which is
Mm.
incredible. But yeah, so much more to get through, but we've got more weeks in the
Right.
year, Elle.
We
So,
do. We got plenty more weeks, although the year is going very quickly.
yeah,
But yeah, all right. Well, I look forward to talking with you again, Kath, and look forward to what else we're learning in life and that we get to share with our listeners. And listeners, don't forget to let us know what you're learning and what your takeaways are, because we'd love to
for
hear from
sure.
you. Mm.
Thanks, Elle. See you
All
next
right, bless
time.
you.